Be honest.
I'm so gonna.
Why do I have a hamburger? Oh, is that fancy?
You're watching
Okay, so first is going to be building your record base. So we made a distinction between the 1.4 millimeter and the 2 millimeter thickness triad material. We recommend using the 1.4 so that when you set teeth and you don't have enough restorative space, you don't have to go back and drill through the record base. 1.4 should be thin enough, gives you an extra 0.6 millimeters at least compared to the 2 millimeter one. So this is the record base for the denture, and you want it to be as adapted to the ridge as possible. And you're going to start from the middle and then move outwards. Don't just drop it on top. You're going to get something that's not as closely adapted as to the ridge. Thank you. So same thing as what you did with the custom tray. You're going to cut to now the blue line, the true depth, and you're still going to relieve your frenum area. I'm going to try to do this as fast as possible. Okay, relieve the frenum. Same thing, you're going to make those little peaked triangles. Make sure you should be able to see at least the base of the attachment of where it attaches to the ridge. And then one more over here. So now I'm going to push it down. Same thing with the custom tray. You want to try to keep it as uniformly thick as possible. It is a little bit less important now that you can kind of stretch a little bit more if you need to, but try to aim for a uniform thickness. After this is cooked, cured, you will also trim it down with your lab carbide burrs and straight nose handpiece. Because this is going in the patient's mouth, you want it as smooth and comfortable as possible. If it feels sharp to your hands, it will feel sharp to your patient's mouth. Okay, can I ask someone to go cook this for me? In the triad machine? I can do it. Oh. Gracias.
And is that 2 minutes?
2 minutes, flip it over another minute. This is thinner than the 2 millimeter, so theoretically it should take fewer time, less time. Actually, okay, while she's doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and start on the, so also no handles, obviously.
Is there a reason last time we did that we had a layer
The foil? It's just prevent polymerization shrinkage. You can do that again if you want. Absolutely. I encourage you that. Okay.
If we don't, is it gonna shrink?
It shouldn't shrink that much. As long as you're not, baking it for like 5 minutes, 6 minutes. An adequate 2 minute, flip it over 1 minute, it should be enough. Okay, for the record base, you're going to create a wax rim. Or sorry, for the occlusal wax rim, you're going to create a kind of rectangular prism of wax in the dimensions that were set for you. When you're creating it with the base plate wax, the main important thing is don't incorporate air bubbles. So this is what I do. Again, kind of play around with it and figure out what works for you guys. So with the torch, you turn it on and there's an oxygen intake control. So you can either change it from something that's full oxygen and the hottest portion will be the tip right here, or you can change it to something that is more flamey, or yeah, and then it's not as hot. So for the purpose of just melting it, we'll do something like this. Never put it on its side unless you have a base, or else it'll teeter-totter. And since I'm left-handed, I like to put it to the right side. So whenever I'm working with my left hand, I never have to cross over a flame. And that protects both myself and from knocking it down and hurting my neighbors. Okay, so let's see. So the first thing I do is try to get that rectangular prism by rolling up this wax. And I'm gonna do that by melting it like this. I give it a little hook first so it melts both sides, and then I press it down. I go from the middle and then squeeze outwards to ensure no air bubbles are incorporated. Once I've done that, I go on with the next fold. Same thing, start from the middle, squeeze outwards. And you can kind of check your work by looking at it from the side view. You shouldn't be able to see any gaps. So mine is tightly wound, okay? Once again. You should be able to get to the part where one sheet of base plate is enough for one arch. You will not need more than one for an arch. Continue.
So you do this after you do use the other material?
What material? The prefabricated. Oh, that, yes, that's a record base. You need to do that first. But that's pretty similar to custom tray, so I didn't go too much in depth on that. Anyone have a ruler? Or a Perrier probe? Can I borrow that? Okay, so the pre-pros kit has some really good tools for us to use for the wax rim. My favorite are these three. So mini spatula, the 7, and the 31 carbon. These will allow us to form most of the shapes and contours that we need. Most of the contours will just straight 90-degree edges. So it's really nice to have a flat edge for that. So this is already more than I need. So I'm just gonna cut off the excess. And I'm going to make this into a rectangular prism. This rough thickness is around 8 millimeters. So for the posterior, this is already enough for me. I'm only gonna stretch it from the anterior because anterior I want it to be 4 to 6. I don't need as much thickness, the full 8, so I can stretch it out this way. And that'll allow me to go from half of the maxillary tuberosity all the way down to the other half, okay? Now is when I don't like it to be as hot. Like this, heat it up, and you're just gonna stretch it. So, I can also just kind of measure now. I want it, I'm short by a lot. This is roughly enough already. I'm not gonna worry about the height yet. I like to worry about that last because that is the easiest to change with the pancake spatula. I'm gonna worry about the kind of setting of it to the record base, so that includes the posterior being to half the maxillary tuberosity and also the incisal flare. I want it to hit at least the mark of 8 to 10 from the middle of the incisive papilla forward. So once I'm happy with this, I think it's about on the ridge. I'm gonna adhere it to the record base with sticky wax. And you have to use sticky wax or else this will easily come off. So this is a sticky wax. It's a different type of wax that when melted and then allowed to cool, it allows other wax to stick to it. So this should be going on kind of both. So what I do is I kind of cheat and I do it at the same time. And I'll just dab it on here. One thing about this base plate wax is that it does change dimensions slightly in different temperatures. So like on a hot summer day, if you leave it in a hot room, what you leave it as might not be the same as what you come back to it as. The same thing again, heat this up.
How do we prevent that? Just take it home?
The sticky wax sticks better when you heat it up. So you apply it before you put the base plate wax on top of it. Heat it again, and then put it immediately, and then it really sticks. When it's cooled down, it loses its sticky property. So you want to heat it up right before you put it together. Okay.
You can also heat it from the bottom. Sometimes I do that, where you heat it like this, and it kind of melts through from the other side of the record base. Make sure it's really nicely adhered to the denture base, and you can use the 31 carver to make sure it's all nicely sealed onto it. Both on the buckle and the pallet. Also, can someone get me a white mixing bowl and then just fill up with water about halfway? Make sure to seal the palo as well. Thank you. Something I do to let it cool down faster is just dunk it into the water. Killed it. Okay. Once it's fully on, double check everything again. So now I can kind of hold down the posterior and then lean the anterior, pull the anterior to create that insoluble flare of 8 to 10 degrees. So once I have that, now I will look at the width. And the width that I have right now is 8, around 7, and around 6. So I can take it down in the premolar region and the anterior region just a little bit. Now I'm going to show you guys how to reduce the height. So I just realized I actually need a ruler. Dr. Song, can I have a scalpel? For the ruler, because I don't have a ruler.
You guys don't have a ruler, so let's see a ruler. You don't have
Yeah, the True Bite ruler. Anyone have one?
Is that worth it?
Let me ask. Here you go.
Okay, this has a ruler on the end. So now we're gonna go for 20. So you want it to be 22, I would go for around 24. Just don't reduce it too much. It's always easier to remove than to add. So 24. Measure twice, cut once. Or sorry, 18. 18 is in the posterior. So I'll measure to 20. Good.
So 18, how many in the anterior?
22. So in the anterior, I'll leave around 24.
Why are you leaving 2 extra millimeters?
just a little room for error. Yeah. Because once you remove too much and you have to go back and add more, it's a lot more difficult.
So it's thicker than your.
Whoever doesn't retrieve it though, they can share and then the next group should use it and then retrieve it.
So now we're going to melt off this wax, and you're going to want to try to keep it as clean as possible. Make these little creases on one placemat, and I'll show you guys why I do this.
Make sure you have because glass once it gets to your scrub, it's not that easy to keep going. If that happens, you can iron, use a newspaper, put the newspaper on top of the wax, you can iron continuously. A lot of times you can get about 90% of it. Okay? Use count.
Is there a new flame? This is almost out. Hannah, do you have another flame? Torch? Guess not. Okay, in that case, I'm not going to melt off all of it. I'm going to actually try to cut it off to save.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ooh.
So you're going to heat up the pancake spatula, and sometimes there will be gunk left over from the previous user. Make sure it's really, really nice and hot and clean. You're going to clean it by scraping it on this crease on the side of the edge of the table. Once you do that, you're going to take your wax rim, and with it marked, you're going to just melt it.
Wow.
So always, once you are going to reheat it, just clean it off and then reheat.
How do you do differentially? Is it? It's supposed to be low in the back, right?
Yeah, so kind of the same idea as when you're trimming it, you apply differential pressure. So if I'm trying to reduce it more in the back, then I'm going to apply more pressure in the back. You can even start off tilted like this. Reduce in the back and then meet into the front. Stop every so often and check your measurements. So my right one is a little bit lower. And then my front just a little bit more. Once it's full, just scooch it up a bit and you have a new crease. So this is already at the measurements that I think I wanted. 22. See, I can go a little bit more on that side. I can go just a little bit more.
Otherwise, you're saying you can also just cut it with like the buffalo knife?
I think this method is better. When you cut it, you can't ensure it to be completely flat. This, there's no mistake.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard. Okay. Once you've done that, I would remeasure your thickness. So sometimes your width does change. 10. So my anterior is still a little bit thicker. I'm at the edge that I want, which means now I have to remove from the palate, not the buckle. If I remove the buckle, I've reduced the incisal flare. So one way to do that is to take this, kind of
It's gonna be a long ass video.
So in the posterior, you're going to want to make a 45-degree angle cut, ending at the half of the maxillary tuberosity. Yes, so you're going to cut a 45-degree cut with it ending at half of tuberosity. So it doesn't have to be too precise. Something roughly like this. Clean your instruments as often as possible. It will make your life a little bit easier. Okay. And then really look for a symmetrical and uniform arch form. So sometimes the left side or the right side is thicker, and sometimes the other one is. So you just want to adjust it with your hand or with an instrument. I'm about happy with this. And next, I'm going to just make it really nice. Take another base plate wax, heat it up, and we're kind of just plastering it onto the front of it, just to make it really nice and smooth. Yes, it will change the thickness ever so slightly. If you don't want to change the thickness, you can set it slightly below the edge of it. And then kind of just adapt it to the record base, and it'll come off really nice. Okay. And then last finishing touches is just smoothing it all out.
You should do a cross ASMR.
Did you use all the measurements? All the measurements that you drew on the
Can you say
on
that
the
again?
cast?
Sorry, what?
Were you able to use all the measurements you used on the cast that you draw?
All the
mark-
reference lines?
Yeah.
I'm only using the insides of the pillow to get to the 8 to 10 millimeters interior to it, and the maxillary tuberosity.
Okay.
The ridge, this line is used for setting teeth. Same with the midline.
Okay.
Midline has no effect on the wax room. So after you finish this in the lab, you still have to try this into the patient's mouth and adjust it to get to the plane of occlusion. And once you've achieved that, only then can you do a Facebook transfer or a bite record.
But we still have PCC on Friday too, so it's I was happy.
So now I'm just trying to make it nice and smooth, make it comfortable for the patient. So you'll kind of see from the anterior, I have this divot here. That will end up being a enlarged buccal corridor for the patient, and that's sometimes not as aesthetic. You can just fill it in with wax. One way that you can do it is just take base plate wax, straighten this up, and just melt it on. And then I like to flash. Dry it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually fun, I think. Sure. And then sometimes you can also just fill in the palate area too, just to cover the record base. Yep. Last step is just to make everything nice and smooth. Okay. This is the overall idea. Do you guys have any questions? For the wax room?
Just in general.
No. You're gonna put teeth on them
But this is part of the final product.
for today.
Prior to this is I think she's given it a This is gonna be the patient's mouth. The wax would just melt in their mouth.
Oh, we're gonna put acrylic over it.
Well, that's a whole other process. So like we have to set the teeth in.
And then put acrylic?
Temporary?
Yeah.
Alright, I'm not gonna mess with this anymore. Oh, one thing that you guys should do is make sure that once you create the wax room that it can still seat into your master cast. Try to keep your master cast as clean as possible. We don't want to see any wax or residue or debris on your master cast because that prevents the seating of your record base. Okay? Any other questions?
If there's an undercut,
Sorry?
there's an undercut. Undercuts.
Oh, undercuts. That's a very good question, actually. So when you're making your record base, you should be blocking out undercuts as well. Yes, but there's really not much on this case. All right, onwards.
Yeah, where should we go?